I sat across from my smirking mother and arrogant brother Tyler at the mahogany conference table when the lawyer announced Tyler inherits $5 million, while I get Grandpa's beat-up 1978 Buick Skylark. My mother's cruel laughter echoed as she said those devastating words about not every child being a blessing. Then the lawyer mentioned one final sealed letter from Grandpa. As he broke the wax seal, I watched my mother's triumphant expression crumble into pure terror. The fluorescent lights hummed above us in the sterile law office as reality crashed down on me like a freight train. $5 million. Tyler got $5 million, and I got a rusty car that probably wasn't worth $500. The numbers swirled in my head as I tried to process what just happened. Well, Kara, I suppose you'll finally have transportation that matches your station in life, my mother Patricia said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. She adjusted her pearl necklace and smoothed down her navy blazer, every gesture calculated to remind me how different we were. Tyler leaned back in his leather chair, his designer suit perfectly pressed, and let out a low chuckle. I have to admit, I was wondering when you'd find out about this arrangement. Dad and I discussed it months ago when Grandpa started getting sick. My stomach dropped. Months ago? Oh yes, Tyler continued, examining his manicured fingernails. We thought the car would be perfect for you, something reliable but not too flashy. You understand. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his weathered face showing signs of distress at the family dynamics unfolding before him. He'd been practicing law for over 30 years, but I could tell this level of cruelty was testing even his professional composure. Now, if we could please maintain some decorum, he said quietly, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. But my mother wasn't finished. She turned to face me fully, her green eyes cold and calculating. Kara, darling, you have to understand something about life. Not every child is destined for greatness. Some children are blessings who bring joy and success to their families. She gestured toward Tyler. And some children are simply burdens. The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. After 28 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, she'd finally said it out loud. My father Daniel sat silently beside her, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an uncomfortable fidgeting. He kept glancing at his expensive watch and avoiding my eyes completely. The man who used to read me bedtime stories had become a stranger who couldn't even look at his own daughter during the most humiliating moment of her life. I thought back to my childhood, to all those Christmas mornings when Tyler got the newest video game console, while I got discount store clothes. The family vacations where I stayed with neighbors because there wasn't enough room in the car. The graduation ceremonies where they cheered loudly for Tyler's achievements and whispered quietly during mine. Your grandfather spoiled you, my mother continued, her voice gaining momentum like a locomotive. He filled your head with nonsense about being special, about having potential. But look at you now, 28 years old, working at that little bookstore, living in a studio apartment. Tyler has his master's degree from Columbia, his own financial consulting firm. He's everything a parent dreams of. Tyler nodded smugly. Grandpa always was too soft-hearted. He never understood that real family means recognizing who deserves investment and who doesn't. The conference room felt smaller with each passing second. The mahogany walls seemed to close in around me as 28 years of suppressed pain bubbled to the surface. Every family dinner where I was ignored, every achievement that went unrecognized, every birthday where Tyler's gifts cost 10 times more than mine. The vehicle is currently parked at your grandfather's property, Mr. Henderson said gently, clearly trying to redirect the conversation to logistics. The keys are in his workshop. Perfect, my mother said, standing and gathering her purse. Kara can collect her inheritance, and we can all move on with our lives. But then Tyler delivered the final blow, the twist that made everything exponentially worse. He leaned forward with a grin that made my blood run cold. Actually, Kara, there's something else you should know. I've been aware of the will's contents for months because I helped suggest the car idea to Grandpa. We thought it would be a fitting way to help you understand your place in this family once and for all. Consider it a final life lesson from the old man. The room spun around me. My own brother had orchestrated this humiliation, had actively participated in ensuring I received this devastating blow. It wasn't just favoritism or neglect, it was calculated cruelty. I stood up on shaking legs, my chair scraping against the floor with a harsh screech. "I need to leave." "Of course you do," my mother called after me as I headed for the door. "Running away is what you do best." But as I reached for the door handle, something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, raw and bleeding, but underneath it, a spark of determination began to glow. Grandpa had loved me. Of all the people in my family, he had been the one person who believed in me, who saw value in who I was. If he'd left me that car, there had to be a reason beyond what my family understood. The drive to Grandpa's property took me through the winding back roads of rural Connecticut, past the apple orchards and stone walls that had defined my childhood escapes. Every summer, when the tension at home became unbearable, I'd ride my bicycle the 8 miles to his little farmhouse where I could breathe again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his gravel driveway as I pulled up in my rental car. The white clapboard house looked exactly the same, with its green shutters and wraparound porch, where we'd spent countless hours talking about everything from astronomy to his stories of working in the shipyards during the Korean War. The garage stood separate from the house, a weathered barn-like structure that had always been Grandpa's sanctuary. As kids, Tyler had never shown interest in the workshop, preferring video games to the smell of motor oil and sawdust. But I had loved it there, watching Grandpa restore old radios and tinker with engines, learning about patience and craftsmanship. The heavy wooden doors creaked as I pulled them open, flooding the space with golden sunlight. And there she was, the 1978 Buick Skylark that had supposedly ruined my life. But as I walked around the vehicle, something didn't match my family's description of a worthless junker. The burgundy paint showed signs of careful maintenance, with only minor surface rust around the wheel wells. The chrome bumpers gleamed with recent polishing, and when I peered through the windows, the black vinyl interior looked pristine. This wasn't some abandoned piece of scrap metal. This was a car that someone had lovingly maintained. I found the keys hanging on a wooden peg next to Grandpa's workbench, just where Mr. Henderson said they'd be. But as I moved through the workshop, memories flooded back of all the hours I'd spent here, learning about engines and electrical systems, while Grandpa patiently answered my endless questions. The workbench itself told a story of meticulous organization. Every tool had its place, every drawer labeled in Grandpa's careful handwriting. But something seemed different from my childhood memories. The workshop felt larger somehow, and as I looked more carefully, I realized why. The concrete floor near the back wall showed subtle seam lines that I'd never noticed before. Following my instincts, I knelt down and traced the pattern with my fingers. When I pressed along one edge, a section of the floor shifted slightly. My heart raced as I found a hidden latch mechanism. The false floor lifted to reveal a secret workspace below, complete with specialized tools and equipment I'd never seen before. This wasn't just a hobbyist's workshop. This was the setup of a serious automotive restorer. Among the vintage restoration tools, I discovered a file cabinet filled with documentation. The papers inside made my breath catch: original purchase receipts, restoration records, and authentication certificates that told an incredible story. The 1978 Buick Skylark sitting in the garage wasn't just any car. According to the documentation, it was one of only 250 factory-equipped with a rare performance package that made it extraordinarily valuable to collectors. The restoration records showed that Grandpa had spent over 15 years bringing it back to concours condition. But the biggest surprise waited behind the dashboard when I started the engine and began exploring the car's interior. Hidden behind the glove compartment, I found a small envelope sealed with wax, the same type of seal Mr. Henderson had broken on Grandpa's letter. Inside, I discovered a hand-drawn map of the local area, with several properties marked in red ink. Alongside the map were financial documents showing property deeds, business licenses, and bank statements that painted a picture of wealth far beyond anything my family had imagined. Grandpa hadn't just been a retired shipyard worker living on Social Security. He'd been quietly acquiring commercial real estate throughout the county, building a portfolio worth millions of dollars that had somehow remained completely hidden from my parents and Tyler. The documents showed restaurants, small office buildings, and retail spaces, all generating steady rental income that flowed into accounts my family knew nothing about. The monthly revenues alone were more than Tyler's entire inheritance. As I sat in the driver's seat of what I now realized was a meticulously restored classic car, worth more than most people's houses, my phone rang. Mr. Henderson's name appeared on the screen. "Kara, I apologize for calling so late, but something has come to my attention that requires immediate discussion. Could you possibly return to my office tomorrow morning? There are additional documents that need to be reviewed as part of your grandfather's estate." "What kind of documents?" "I'm not entirely certain yet, but they were discovered in a safety deposit box that your grandfather apparently maintained separately from his primary banking relationship. The bank contacted me this afternoon when they realized the connection to his estate." My hands trembled as I ended the call. Whatever Grandpa had hidden in that safety deposit box, it was significant enough to warrant an emergency meeting. Combined with the property documents I'd just discovered, it seemed my grandfather had been living a far more complex life than anyone in my family had understood. As I drove the Skylark home through the darkening Connecticut countryside, its powerful engine purring with surprising smoothness, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything my family thought they knew about power, money, and who really deserved what. The next morning brought a crisp October chill that seemed to match the tension crackling through Mr. Henderson's office. I arrived early, nursing a cup of coffee, and trying to calm my nerves after a sleepless night spent analyzing the property documents from Grandpa's hidden files. My family arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. My mother's confidence restored after yesterday's victory. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and Tyler sported a new watch that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "I trust this won't take long," my mother said as she settled into her chair. "Tyler has a very important client meeting this afternoon." Mr. Henderson nodded solemnly, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "I'm afraid we have some rather significant developments regarding your father's estate that require immediate attention." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope sealed with red wax. Unlike the previous day's documents, this one bore my grandfather's full name written in elegant script across the front. "This was discovered in a safety deposit box that your father maintained at First National Bank under a separate account. The contents were specifically designated to be opened only in the presence of the entire family." Tyler leaned forward, his earlier confidence wavering slightly. "What kind of contents?" "A personal letter from your father, along with several legal documents that significantly impact the distribution of his estate." Mr. Henderson carefully broke the wax seal and withdrew a thick piece of cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandpa's, written in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas letters. "My dearest family," Mr. Henderson began reading aloud. "If you are hearing this letter, it means I am no longer with you, and certain truths must finally be revealed." The room grew absolutely silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. "First, I must address something that Patricia and Daniel have kept hidden for 28 years. Kara, my dear child, you are not their biological daughter." The words hit the room like an explosion. My mother's face drained of color while Tyler's mouth fell open in shock. But the letter continued. "Kara was born to my business partner's daughter, Margaret, and her husband James, who died in a car accident when she was 6 months old. Patricia and Daniel had been trying to have a second child for years without success, and when this tragedy occurred, they agreed to adopt Kara as their own." My hands began shaking uncontrollably. Everything I'd believed about my identity, my place in the family, was collapsing around me. However, what Patricia and Daniel never knew is that Kara's biological grandfather, my business partner William Morrison, established a substantial trust fund for her before his death 5 years ago. This trust, worth approximately $12 million, becomes available to Kara on her 30th birthday, or upon my death, whichever comes first. Tyler shot to his feet. "That's impossible. We would have known about something like that." But Mr. Henderson held up his hand, and continued reading. The trust was maintained separately through Morrison Family Holdings, completely independent of my own estate, which is why it never appeared in any documentation you might have seen. My mother finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "This can't be legal. We're her parents. We raised her." "The adoption is completely legal and binding," Mr. Henderson confirmed, looking up from the letter. "But the trust fund is controlled by Morrison Family Holdings and supersedes any family arrangements." Then came the part that made my mother's face turn ashen white. "However, there is one more matter that must be addressed before any inheritances can be finalized. Over the past 3 years, I have discovered that someone has been systematically stealing money from my business accounts." The letter went on to detail how Grandpa had noticed discrepancies in his books, how he'd hired a private investigator, and what they'd uncovered. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers, credit cards opened in his name, forged signatures on business documents. The investigation revealed that Patricia has been embezzling funds to cover gambling debts accumulated at the Mohegan Sun Casino, while Tyler has been using stolen money to fund his failed investment ventures, including a cryptocurrency scheme that lost over $200,000 of my money. Tyler's expensive composure cracked completely. "That's not true. I borrowed that money. It was a loan." "A loan that was never authorized, never documented, and never repaid," Mr. Henderson said calmly, producing a folder of bank records. "Your grandfather documented everything." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair toppling backward. "This is ridiculous. We're going to contest all of this." But the letter wasn't finished. "Because of these criminal activities, I am hereby revoking Tyler's inheritance entirely and directing that all stolen funds be recovered through legal proceedings. Furthermore, Patricia and Tyler are permanently banned from any involvement in my business holdings or real estate properties." The final paragraph hit like a nuclear bomb. "All of my remaining assets, including my business interests, real estate holdings, and personal property, will be transferred to Kara effective immediately upon my death. She has shown herself to be a person of integrity, who understands the value of hard work and honest living." The room erupted into chaos. Tyler began shouting about lawyers and legal challenges, while my mother frantically dialed numbers on her phone, trying to reach someone who could help her understand what had just happened. But Mr. Henderson wasn't done. He reached back into the envelope and withdrew another set of documents. "There's also this codicil, which your grandfather filed separately just 2 weeks before his death. It states that if any family members contest the will or attempt to claim ownership of assets through legal challenges, their access to any family trust funds will be permanently revoked." My mother's phone call was brief and devastating. When she hung up, her face had gone completely pale. "What did they say?" Tyler demanded. "The bank confirms it all," she whispered. "The accounts, the investigation, everything. They've frozen all of Dad's business accounts pending resolution of the theft charges. For 28 years, I had been the unwanted daughter, the burden, the child who didn't deserve investment or attention. And now, in the space of one letter, I had become the primary heir to an empire I never knew existed. But more than that, I had learned the truth about who I really was, and why I had never quite fit into the family that raised me. Within 48 hours of the will reading, I found myself sitting in the offices of Brennan and Associates, a forensic accounting firm that specialized in financial fraud cases. Sarah Brennan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver hair and an intensity that commanded respect, spread documents across the conference table like a detective laying out evidence. "Your grandfather was extremely thorough," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "He documented every suspicious transaction going back 3 years, including timestamps, IP addresses for online transfers, and even photographs of forged signatures. The evidence was overwhelming. My mother had developed a gambling addiction that started with weekend trips to Atlantic City, but escalated into multi-thousand-dollar losses at Connecticut's casinos. The bank records showed cash advances, wire transfers, and credit card charges that painted a picture of someone desperately trying to chase losses with bigger and bigger bets. "The pattern is classic," Sarah explained. "Small amounts at first, easily overlooked in business accounts. then larger withdrawals as the addiction progressed and the debts accumulated. Tyler's theft had been more sophisticated, but equally devastating. He'd used Grandpa's business credentials to open cryptocurrency trading accounts, investing stolen funds in volatile digital currencies that had crashed spectacularly. When those investments failed, he doubled down with more stolen money, creating a spiral of loss that ultimately cost Grandpa over $300,000. What makes this particularly egregious, Sarah continued, is that both perpetrators knew your grandfather was elderly and might not notice the discrepancies immediately. They were counting on his diminished oversight to cover their tracks. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when Sarah produced records from Morrison Family Holdings, the trust established by my biological grandfather. The trust hadn't just been sitting idle for 28 years. It had been actively managed and grown by a board of trustees who had never forgotten about the little girl orphaned by tragedy. Your biological grandfather was William Morrison, who co-founded Morrison Webb Construction with your adoptive grandfather. When William died 5 years ago, he left explicit instructions that his granddaughter, you, should be located and informed of your inheritance when you reached maturity. The trust documents revealed that William had been monitoring my life from a distance, receiving updates about my education, my character, and my development through the connection with Grandpa. He'd watched me grow up and had been pleased with the woman I'd become, despite the challenges I'd faced within my adoptive family. The trust is currently valued at $14.7 million, Sarah announced. It includes stock holdings, real estate investments, and a controlling interest in several construction projects along the eastern seaboard. I felt dizzy as the numbers swirled around me. In less than a week, I'd gone from inheriting a rusty car to discovering I was worth more than $15 million. But the investigation also revealed something that broke my heart. My father, Daniel, the man who had sat silently during my humiliation at the will reading, had actually been trying to protect me all along. Your father contacted our firm 6 months ago, Sarah revealed. He'd discovered the theft and wanted to document it properly before confronting your mother and brother. He was afraid they might try to pin the blame on you if the truth came out suddenly. She handed me a folder containing copies of emails my father had sent to her office, detailing his concerns about the missing money and his fears about how it might affect my relationship with Grandpa. He specifically requested that any investigation be conducted discreetly until after your grandfather's death, because he didn't want family drama to affect your grandfather's final months. The emails revealed a side of my father I'd never seen, a man torn between loyalty to his wife and son, and his genuine love for the daughter who had never quite fit into their family dynamics. He'd been quietly gathering evidence, preparing to expose the truth while trying to protect everyone involved. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in the Buick Skylark, which I'd learned was worth nearly $80,000 as a fully restored collector's car. The autumn leaves crunched under the tires as I pulled into the driveway of the colonial home where I'd grown up feeling like an outsider. My father answered the door before I could knock, his face haggard and aged by stress. He looked like a man who'd been carrying the weight of terrible secrets for too long. "Kara, I need to talk to you," he said quietly. "There are things you need to understand about what's been happening." We sat in his study, surrounded by the law books and financial journals that had defined his career as a tax attorney. For the first time in years, he looked directly at me without the uncomfortable avoidance that had characterized our relationship. "Your mother has a gambling problem," he said simply. "It started small, but over the past 3 years, she's lost our savings, mortgaged this house, and when that wasn't enough, she convinced Tyler to help her access your grandfather's accounts. How long have you known?" I suspected something was wrong about a year ago when I noticed irregularities in our personal finances, but I didn't discover the extent of the theft until 6 months ago. He ran his hands through his graying hair. "I should have stopped it immediately, but I was afraid of what it would do to our family. Where are they now?" "Your mother checked herself into a treatment facility in Massachusetts yesterday. Tyler is meeting with criminal lawyers to negotiate some kind of plea agreement." He paused, looking older than his 62 years. "They know they're facing serious legal consequences." But then he surprised me by reaching into his desk drawer and withdrawing a thick envelope with my name written across the front. Your grandfather asked me to give this to you personally, after everything else had been revealed. He said you'd need to understand the complete truth before you could make decisions about your future. Inside the envelope was another letter, this one shorter but equally earth-shattering. Grandpa had known about my biological inheritance long before my birth parents died. In fact, William Morrison had asked him to be the guardian of that secret, ensuring that I grew up in a loving family while the trust grew safely in the background. The letter revealed that my adoption hadn't been the charitable gesture I'd always believed. William Morrison had specifically chosen my adoptive parents because of their connection to Grandpa, creating a situation where I would be raised within the extended family business network while maintaining my legal claim to the Morrison family assets. Your grandfather and William Morrison planned this together, my father explained. They wanted you to have both the security of a family and the financial foundation to build whatever life you chose. As I drove home that night, past the New England churches and village greens that had shaped my childhood, I realized that everything I'd believed about my place in the world had been constructed on incomplete information. I wasn't the unwanted burden who'd stumbled into good fortune. I was a young woman whose path had been carefully protected by men who understood that real wealth came not just from money, but from character, resilience, and the wisdom to use power responsibly. The emergency probate hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a gray November morning that seemed to match the somber mood hanging over our fractured family. I sat in the front row of the Hartford County Courthouse, flanked by Sarah Brennan and my newly hired attorney, Margaret Walsh, who specialized in estate law and had worked with the Morrison Family Trust for over a decade. Tyler and my mother entered the courtroom with their own legal representation, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. James Rothschild from Hartford's most prestigious law firm, the kind of attorney who charged $500 an hour and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Judge Catherine Reynolds presided over the hearing, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every family crisis imaginable during her 20 years on the bench. She reviewed the case documents with the methodical precision of a surgeon, occasionally glancing up at our family with an expression that suggested she found our situation particularly distasteful. "This is highly irregular," she began, adjusting her reading glasses. "In 30 years of probate law, I've rarely seen a case involving this level of alleged financial impropriety within a family structure." Rothschild stood up, his confident smile suggesting he believed money and reputation could overcome inconvenient evidence. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that any financial transactions were conducted with full family approval and represent legitimate loans that would have been formalized through proper documentation if Mr. Morrison hadn't passed away unexpectedly." But Sarah Brennan was ready with a presentation that systematically dismantled that argument. She'd prepared visual charts showing the timeline of thefts, correlating them with casino records, cryptocurrency trading logs, and credit card statements that painted an undeniable picture of deliberate fraud. "The evidence shows a clear pattern of deception," she announced, activating a projector that displayed bank records on the wall. "Unauthorized transfers totaling over $400,000, conducted using forged signatures and falsified business documents." Tyler's lawyer objected repeatedly, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, but Sarah had prepared for every possible challenge. She produced handwriting analysis, comparing Tyler's signature to the forged documents, computer forensics, showing the IP addresses used for online transfers, and even security camera footage from the bank, showing Tyler making unauthorized withdrawals. My mother sat silently throughout the presentation, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight during her week in treatment, and her usual perfectly styled appearance had been replaced by simple clothes and no makeup. For the first time in my life, she looked vulnerable and human rather than coldly untouchable. But the biggest surprise came when Margaret Walsh stood up and announced that additional evidence had been discovered during the trust review process. "Your Honor, we've uncovered documents that significantly changed the scope of this case," she said, producing a leather portfolio that I'd never seen before. These materials were discovered in a safety deposit box, maintained by Morrison Family Holdings, separate from any accounts controlled by the deceased. The documents inside revealed that Grandpa had updated his will multiple times over the past 5 years, each revision triggered by new discoveries about the theft. But the final codicil, dated just 2 weeks before his death, contained provisions that no one had anticipated. Upon discovery of criminal activity by any family members, Margaret read aloud, "All business assets and real estate holdings shall be transferred immediately to Kara Morrison Webb, along with full operational control of Morrison Webb Construction Company and its subsidiary corporations." Tyler jumped to his feet. "That's impossible. I'm the business heir. I have a master's degree in finance." But Judge Reynolds silenced him with a sharp look. "Mr. Morrison, you'll have an opportunity to speak when recognized by the court." Margaret continued reading the codicil, which detailed provisions that transformed me from an inheritance recipient into the controlling shareholder of a business empire worth over $20 million. The construction company alone employed over 200 people across 3 states, with ongoing contracts for major commercial and residential developments. Furthermore, the document continued, "Any attempts to contest these arrangements through legal challenges will result in permanent forfeiture of all family trust benefits and potential criminal prosecution for elder abuse and financial exploitation." Rothschild tried to argue that the codicil was invalid because it hadn't been properly witnessed, but Margaret produced certification records showing that Grandpa had specifically traveled to the bank to execute the document under their supervised witness program, precisely to avoid any challenges to its validity. The hearing took a dramatic turn when Judge Reynolds announced she was calling an additional witness who had requested permission to address the court. An elderly gentleman in a navy suit entered the courtroom, walking with dignity despite his obvious frailty. "This is Harold Morrison, the surviving trustee of the Morrison family holdings," Margaret announced. "He has critical information about the family trust that affects these proceedings." Harold Morrison was my biological grandfather's brother, a man who had been managing my inheritance for 28 years while watching from a distance as I grew up. His testimony revealed the true scope of what my birth family had left for me. "My brother William never forgot about his granddaughter," Harold said in a voice that carried despite his age. "He established the trust not just as financial security, but as a foundation for her to build a meaningful life. When he learned about the theft from her adoptive family, he specifically requested that control of Morrison Webb Construction be transferred to her upon any evidence of financial impropriety." The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Not only was I inheriting Grandpa's estate, but I was also gaining control of the construction company that William Morrison had built over 40 years of hard work. "The combined assets," Harold continued, "including the trust fund, business interests, and real estate holdings, are currently valued at approximately $31 million. Tyler's expensive composure cracked completely. "This is insane. She doesn't know anything about running a construction company. She works in a bookstore." But Harold Morrison's final statement silenced all objections. "Miss Morrison Webb has been observed and evaluated for character, intelligence, and moral foundation for her entire adult life. The trust board unanimously agrees that she possesses the integrity and judgment necessary to honor both family legacies responsibly." Judge Reynolds called a recess to review the additional documents, but when court reconvened, her decision was swift and final. "Based on the overwhelming evidence of financial fraud and the clear provisions established by both estates, I hereby affirm the transfer of all assets to Kara Morrison Webb, effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering full restitution of stolen funds and directing the district attorney to review this case for potential criminal charges." As we left the courthouse that afternoon, I realized that the rusty car that had started this journey was actually the key to unlocking a legacy that 2 generations of men had carefully preserved for the granddaughter they believed deserved something better than the family that had raised her. 6 months after the courthouse revelation, I stood in the executive conference room of Morrison Webb Construction, looking out at the Hartford skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected my new reality. The mahogany table where board meetings occurred was larger than the entire apartment I'd lived in just a year earlier, and the weight of responsibility felt simultaneously overwhelming and invigorating. Sarah Brennan sat across from me, reviewing the financial recovery reports, with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully untangled a complex fraud case. The restitution process had been thorough and swift, with courts ordering the seizure of assets to repay every dollar stolen from Grandpa's accounts. Your mother's house sold for $650,000, Sarah reported. Combined with Tyler's liquidated investment accounts and the cryptocurrency recovery, we've recovered approximately $420,000 of the stolen funds. The remainder is being collected through garnished wages over the next 5 years. My mother had completed her gambling addiction treatment and was now living in a modest apartment in Springfield, working as a receptionist at a medical office while attending weekly therapy sessions. The transformation was startling. Without the constant pressure of maintaining an expensive lifestyle while covering gambling debts, she seemed calmer and more genuine than I'd ever seen her. Tyler's adjustment had been more difficult. His financial consulting business collapsed when news of the theft became public, and he'd been forced to take a position as an entry-level analyst at a mid-sized accounting firm. But the humbling experience seemed to be teaching him lessons that his privileged upbringing had never provided. They're both adhering to the repayment schedule, Sarah continued. Tyler has actually asked if he could increase his monthly payments to resolve the debt faster. The most surprising transformation had been in my father. Released from the burden of keeping family secrets, he'd returned to the man I remembered from early childhood, thoughtful, caring, and genuinely interested in building a relationship with me. He visited my new office regularly, offering advice about business management and sharing stories about Grandpa that helped me understand the legacy I'd inherited. Your grandfather would be proud, he'd told me the previous week. You've taken his values and expanded them beyond anything he imagined possible. Under my leadership, Morrison Webb Construction had grown from a regional company to a major player in sustainable development projects. I'd used the financial resources to invest in green building technologies and worker training programs that created career advancement opportunities for employees who'd traditionally been limited to manual labor positions. The company now employed over 300 people, with projects ranging from affordable housing developments to commercial buildings designed to LEED Platinum standards. More importantly, I'd established profit-sharing programs and educational assistance that ensured the company's success benefited everyone who contributed to it. But perhaps the most meaningful change came when Harold Morrison introduced me to my biological family's extended network. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who had wondered about the little girl, orphaned by tragedy 28 years earlier, welcomed me with warmth that filled emotional voids I'd carried my entire life. Your parents would be so proud of the woman you've become, my biological Aunt Linda told me during a family gathering in Boston. Margaret always said she wanted her daughter to have opportunities to make the world a better place. The Morrison family had a tradition of social responsibility that aligned perfectly with my own values. They'd established scholarships, funded community development projects, and created opportunities for people who might otherwise be overlooked by society. Joining their legacy felt like coming home in ways I'd never experienced. One evening in late spring, I received an unexpected phone call from my mother. Her voice sounded different, softer and more vulnerable than the sharp, critical tone I'd grown up hearing. "Kara, I need to apologize to you," she said quietly. "Not just for the money, but for 28 years of making you feel unwanted and unworthy." The conversation lasted over 2 hours, as she explained how her gambling addiction had distorted her thinking and how therapy had helped her recognize the psychological damage she'd inflicted on our entire family. "I was jealous," she admitted. "Your grandfather loved you in a way that was unconditional and pure, and I couldn't understand why you deserved that when Tyler and I had to work so hard for approval." "You never had to work for Grandpa's approval," I replied gently. "He would have loved you the same way if you'd let him. I know that now. But at the time, your relationship with him made me feel inadequate as a mother and as a daughter-in-law. Instead of examining my own insecurities, I took them out on you. The healing process wasn't instant or complete, but it was genuine." My mother began attending family events again, and while our relationship would never be traditionally maternal, it evolved into something based on mutual respect and honest communication. Tyler's transformation took longer, but eventually led to one of the most meaningful conversations of my life. He appeared at my office one afternoon without an appointment, looking humble and nervous in a way that reminded me of the little boy he'd once been. "I need to ask for your forgiveness," he said simply. "Not because I want anything from you, but because I need to acknowledge how badly I treated you." He explained how his privileged upbringing had taught him to view love and approval as finite resources that had to be competed for rather than shared. When he saw how much attention Grandpa gave me, he'd interpreted it as a threat to his own position in the family hierarchy. "I convinced myself that you were taking something that belonged to me," he said. "But the truth is, there was always enough love for both of us. I was just too insecure to see it." Tyler had used his accounting skills to help other small business owners avoid the financial mistakes he'd made, essentially turning his professional failure into a mission to prevent others from experiencing similar consequences. The work paid modestly, but provided satisfaction that his previous high-earning career had never offered. "I'm actually happier now than I've ever been," he confessed. "Losing everything taught me what actually matters." The culmination of our family's healing process came when I established the Morrison Webb Family Foundation, dedicated to supporting children who'd experienced family trauma or loss. Tyler and my mother both volunteered with the organization, using their experiences to help other families navigate difficult circumstances without repeating the same destructive patterns. But the most unexpected blessing came through my connection to my biological family's history. Harold Morrison introduced me to David Walsh, Margaret Walsh's son, who had taken over much of the legal work for Morrison Family Holdings. David was a thoughtful, intelligent man who shared my passion for using business success to create positive social impact. Our professional relationship gradually evolved into something deeper as we worked together on various family foundation projects. David understood the complexities of inherited wealth and family legacy in ways that most people couldn't. Having grown up watching his mother manage trust funds and family businesses, "You've taken something that could have been a burden and transformed it into a force for good," he told me one evening, as we walked through the gardens at Grandpa's property, which I'd converted into a community center for local families. That property had become a symbol of transformation. The workshop where I'd discovered my true inheritance now served as a training center for young people learning construction skills, while the house provided meeting space for support groups and educational programs. The Buick Skylark, fully restored to its original magnificence, sat in a place of honor in the garage, a reminder that sometimes the things that appear worthless to others contain the greatest treasures. As I stood in the garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the Connecticut hills in shades of gold and amber, I realized that Grandpa's greatest gift hadn't been money or property or business ownership. His greatest gift had been the belief that every person deserves love, respect, and opportunities to grow into their best possible self. The rusty car that had initially felt like an insult had actually been a carefully planned invitation to discover not just financial inheritance, but the legacy of values, character, and purpose that would guide the rest of my life. 1 year after the will reading that changed everything, I stood in the same courthouse where our family's secrets had been exposed, but this time for a celebration rather than a crisis. Judge Catherine Reynolds was officiating my wedding to David Walsh, surrounded by a congregation that represented the complex journey of healing and transformation our families had experienced. My mother sat in the front row wearing a simple blue dress, her face peaceful in ways I'd never seen during my childhood. She'd maintained her sobriety for 8 months and had developed genuine friendships through her support group meetings. The bitter, critical woman who had spent years making me feel unwanted had been replaced by someone who was learning to find joy in simple pleasures and honest relationships. Tyler stood beside David as a groomsman, a role that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. His face showed the kind of contentment that comes from honest work and meaningful relationships. He'd recently been promoted to senior analyst at his firm and had begun teaching financial literacy classes at the community center we'd established at Grandpa's property. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, finally free to express the love he'd always felt, but had been afraid to show during the years of family tension. The guilt he'd carried about the theft and deception had been replaced by pride in the woman I'd become and gratitude for the second chance we'd all been given. But the most meaningful presence was Harold Morrison, now 83 years old but determined to witness the wedding of the granddaughter his family had protected from a distance for so many years. He'd flown in from Boston specifically for the ceremony, bringing with him photo albums and family heirlooms that connected me to parents I'd never had the chance to know. "Your mother would have loved to see this day," he whispered as he placed a pearl necklace around my neck that had belonged to my biological grandmother. She always believed that love was the most important inheritance any family could provide. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt, reflecting the values that had guided both our families through decades of business success and personal challenges. David and I had written our own vows, promising to use our combined resources and influence to create opportunities for others while building a marriage based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Morrison Webb Construction had continued to thrive under my leadership, expanding into renewable energy projects and sustainable housing developments that provided both environmental benefits and economic opportunities for local communities. The company now employed over 500 people across 4 states, with a reputation for ethical business practices and innovative approaches to social responsibility. The Morrison Webb Family Foundation had grown into a significant force for positive change, providing scholarships for over 200 students annually and funding community development projects in underserved areas throughout New England. Tyler had become the foundation's financial director, using his experience with poor money management to help others avoid similar mistakes. My mother had found her own way to contribute by volunteering with gambling addiction support groups, sharing her story to help other families recognize the warning signs of destructive behavior before it could cause irreparable damage. Her transformation from bitter critic to compassionate advocate represented one of the most dramatic personal changes any of us had witnessed. But perhaps the most satisfying development had been watching our broken family learn to function as a genuine support system. Sunday dinners at the community center brought together my adoptive family, my biological family connections, and the extended network of employees and foundation beneficiaries who had become like family through our shared commitment to positive impact. 6 months after the wedding, David and I received news that would complete the healing journey our families had begun. My mother called with excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard since childhood. "Kara, I have something wonderful to tell you," she said. "I'm going to be a grandmother." The pregnancy had come as a surprise, but David and I were thrilled at the prospect of raising a child within the loving, supportive environment we'd worked so hard to create. More importantly, the news gave my mother an opportunity to experience grandparenthood in ways that were healthy and nurturing rather than competitive and manipulative. "I want to be the kind of grandmother you never had," she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "Someone who celebrates your child unconditionally and supports your family without trying to control or judge." Tyler's reaction to becoming an uncle was equally touching. He'd begun studying child development and education, determined to be a positive influence rather than the kind of competitive, jealous relative he'd been to me growing up. "I want this kid to know they're loved and valued from day one," he said. "No games, no favoritism. Just pure family support." The nursery we created in our home was decorated with photographs representing both sides of our extended family history: construction workers and business leaders, craftsmen and teachers, all united by their commitment to building something meaningful with their lives. Grandpa's restored Buick Skylark sat in our garage, maintained in perfect condition as a reminder of the journey that had brought us together. Sometimes David and I would drive through the Connecticut countryside, talking about our plans for the company, the foundation, and the family we were creating together. "Do you think he knew how everything would turn out?" David asked one evening as we watched the sunset from the hills near Grandpa's property. "I think he believed in the power of love and patience to overcome almost any obstacle," I replied. "He planted seeds and trusted that they would grow into something beautiful." The community center had become a gathering place for dozens of families, offering everything from job training programs to support groups for various challenges. The workshop where I'd discovered my true inheritance now buzzed with activity as young people learned construction skills while older community members shared their wisdom and experience. On quiet evenings, when I walked through the gardens where Grandpa had taught me about patience and growth, I could feel his presence in the satisfaction of watching other people discover their own potential and value. The rusty car that had initially seemed like a cruel joke had actually been the key to unlocking not just financial resources, but the opportunity to build a legacy based on love, respect, and genuine care for others. The greatest lesson from our family's journey was that real inheritance isn't measured in dollars or property, but in the values and character that shape how we treat each other and the world around us. Money can be stolen or lost, but the capacity for love, forgiveness, and positive impact grows stronger when it's shared rather than hoarded. As I write this story, our daughter Emma is 2 years old, surrounded by grandparents, aunts, uncles, and extended family members who celebrate her existence without conditions or expectations. She'll grow up knowing that she's valued not for what she might achieve or inherit, but simply for who she is as a human being. The foundation continues to expand its reach. The construction company continues to create meaningful opportunities for families throughout New England. And our own family continues to discover new ways to transform pain into purpose and conflict into compassion. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regret the years of feeling unwanted and undervalued within my adoptive family. The honest answer is that those experiences taught me empathy, resilience, and appreciation for genuine love that I might never have developed otherwise. The contrast between rejection and acceptance made me understand how precious it is to be truly seen and valued for who you are. Grandpa's final gift wasn't really the money, or the business, or even the family connections he helped me discover. His final gift was the knowledge that every person deserves to be loved unconditionally, and that sometimes the most valuable inheritances come disguised as disappointments that force us to dig deeper and discover treasures we never knew existed. What challenges in your own life might actually be disguised opportunities waiting to be discovered? Have you ever experienced a moment when something that seemed like a setback actually led to something far better than you could have imagined? I'd love to hear your stories of unexpected blessings in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family journey, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and discovering the strength you never knew you had. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. And remember that your story isn't over yet. Sometimes the best chapters are still waiting to be written.